Hey now everybody, this is Professor Island and we are discussing critical perspectives, critical approaches, and today we're discussing mythological archetypal criticism. If you look at cultural criticism, you'll realize that a work is going to be translated through a specific set of views. And in fact, if you look at formalist criticism and you look at things like symbolism and irony, really they're based on the symbolism of Western culture. When we talk about somebody going on a journey, or somebody's wearing white and somebody's wearing black and somebody's wearing red, what it means is really culturally sensitive. Different things mean different images mean different things to different groups. Mythological criticism is more encompassing than that. Mythological criticism essentially says that regardless as to the culture in which people exist, and regardless as to the time or the era in which people exist, that we have been telling the same stories over and over again since essentially people began telling stories. And as part of that, we have developed a series of archetypes. Archetypal characters, archetypal plot elements, archetypal settings that we keep using over and over and over again, and their only differences really have to do with the various lenses through which we translate them. Most religions actually have a belief in some higher being. Most religions have some kind of demigod who's half human, half man, or half human, half God. Most religions have some kind of savior that sacrifices themselves. In this kind of replication of this over and over again, including things like some kind of end of the world myth, some kind of beginning of the world myth. All of these things are consistent from one culture to the next, whether you're talking about the Greeks and the Assyrians, to the Middle Ages, to Christianity and Islam and Judaism, etc., etc., etc. And the idea is that when we distill all these things down to the basic core elements, we begin to realize that there's certain characters that get used over and over and over again, and certain plots that get used over and over and over again. Mythological criticism requires that you find these mythological archetypes, both in terms of character and plot. And once you do that, it breaks down your story in a very specific way. This is especially important, or especially useful, actually, when you're talking about a narrative. For songs that are about imagery, not so much. But certainly for anything that has a narrative, that has characters and a plot, you will find that a mythological criticism can be applied. There, on my website, there is a list. And that list basically shows you a random selection of various archetypes. And the idea is that you will see some of these and recognize them from stories that you've read and things that you've understood from before. But also, you'll begin to see that these can be modified to essentially look at the story in a different way. Some of these standard things would be what a hero is, whether they're a tragic hero or a comedic hero, what a heroine is, what a damsel in distress is, the roles of, for example, old powerful women. Is it the crone or the witch, or is it a fairy godmother? And really, what's the difference? The wizard on the male side. Things like what a king means, what a pauper means, what a child means. All of these elements are put into stories because they carry with them instinctively for the reader certain things. A male of powerful status is going to be either feared or respected, depending on the context in which they're placed. A woman of power and status very often is either placed very clearly in the feared section as a wicked witch, or in the revered and desired section with the fairy godmother. But their level of power sometimes is different, and they might have a reflection of the cultures in which those works are presented. Likewise, when you put a child into a story, that means something. That certain level of innocence and naivete is part of the story. And that story might be, for example, that this is a coming-of-age story for a male character. This is another type of coming-of-age story if it's a female character. The male character has to go out and find their way and win something or destroy something powerful in order to replace them and become a man, where in many cases, especially in old type of mythology, what happens is the female character must be good and follow certain particular roles, and then she's saved by some man. Newer literature, however, takes these standard archetypes and flips them around. The reason why the female powerful character is so popular in cinema today is because in the back of the reader's and observer's mind is that this is new, this is different. because we're so used to having the female character being rescued, the fact that she's going out and rescuing other people, the fact that she's going out and destroying the bad guy, the fact that she's going out and she's exerting physical force, in some ways goes against the mythological archetype of what woman means. These things can be used to show how an author is using them directly, and the author can also use them in the reverse, to go against archetype. But it's the audience's understanding of what the archetype is that makes the work feel clever or new. Mythological criticism, as for secondary sources, requires that you find a book or an encyclopedia of literary archetypes. They are very specific in terms of how they get translated. It does not mean that a tree means the same thing in every story. It's always contextual, but there are certain rules for what things mean. There are many journey stories. There's the journey, which means a person goes from here to there, no particular reason, but it's the journey itself, which in some ways replicates life. You also have the quest, in which somebody goes on a journey, but they have to get something or rescue something, which also in some ways is emblematic of life, but it's a different style of life, a different segment of life, very often just a discussion of a small portion of somebody's life. You also have the initiation, in which somebody goes out and they're going to, again, go on a journey, but in this case, it's about their own transformation. These types of things actually get replicated in story after story after story, and after a while you'll begin to recognize them in the movies that you watch, the television that you watch, the books that you read, the graphic novels that you read. This kind of thing is very useful and very helpful. And in fact, many authors rely on their audience to be aware of these things because most authors are well-read themselves. They're going to use these standard tropes over and over again because they like them, and also they think they resonate with the audience. Mythological and archetypal criticism, once you go down that particular road, requires that you identify the major characters in terms of their archetype. You need to identify the plot itself in terms of the archetype. You need to identify the setting. What does desert mean? What does ocean mean? What does a forest mean? In terms of the impact on the story and its effect on the characters. This is a very powerful and often used way to not only create work but also to analyze work, and many of you will find this actually quite interesting because it will resonate with the material that you are familiar with and some of the material that you like. Even if you don't like the material that I assigned you in the class, you'll say, hey, wait a minute, this makes the stuff that I like to read, the stuff that I like to watch, make more sense. Okay? Mythological, archetypal criticism, another one of the many choices that you have in using critical approaches. Stay in touch.